Breaking right now, captured. A suspect now in custody after a gunman on a roof opens fire on a 4th of July parade in Highland Park. Chaos. Families forced to run for safety.
Try to cover her against my body so that if she got shot, I would get shot first.
Leaving strollers, chairs, even shoes behind. At least 6 people are dead, dozens of others wounded. Tonight, team coverage on the victims and the heroes who helped the survivors. Good evening, I'm Erica Sargent.
And I'm Joe Donlin. It has been almost exactly 12 hours now since gunfire shattered a 4th of July celebration in Highland Park. What a day it has been, and we have team coverage tonight. The investigation, how it happened, how the suspect was captured.
The victims, resources for those who need it. And we begin with CBS 2's Dana Kozlov. Dana.
Erica and Joe, 12 hours later, 12 hours after the shooting in downtown Highland Park, and this is the scene right now. We are standing at First and Central, but about a block away, that is the actual scene of the shooting that happened this morning. That is at 2nd and Central. You can see the area now illuminated by floodlights brought in by various fire departments to help investigators process that scene for evidence. Police still blocking off several streets around the actual scene, although the perimeter has shrunk now in the past hour. They are still shining those lights as investigators look for any type of evidence at the scene near the roof where police say the gunman was on when he opened fire at 10:14 this morning, 14 minutes after the 4th of July parade here began. That is video that captured the gunshots and then the chaos that ensued as people in the parade and watching the parade began running for their lives. You can hear he fired, opened fire, stopped, and then opened fire again. People ran for blocks, leaving behind personal items in the streets that are still there now. 5 people pronounced dead at the scene. Another person died at a nearby hospital. Now, police say the suspect used a high-powered rifle. They say he got up onto the roof of that business by using a ladder that was attached to the side of that building. Now, one woman who came back around 6 p.m. tonight to get her belongings describes the moments after the shooting.
So first we weren't sure if it was firecrackers, but it all happened in a split second, and we just said people were starting to run this way. Self-preservation. You just know. I think something just kicks in. You know you have to go. Couldn't help anybody else. We just had to take care of ourselves.
Self-preservation, that is likely what many people were thinking as they began running when they realized that they were not hearing fireworks, but they were indeed hearing gunshots. She was at the parade, by the way, with her husband, her daughter, her son-in-law, and her 6-year-old granddaughter. After that happened, people here in Highland Park were told to shelter in place for hours until that suspect was caught. And just a few minutes ago, I talked to another woman who came here to pick up the belongings that they left behind, and she told me that her friend was able to get away and get in a car and start driving away, but she encountered a woman who was flagging her friend down in that car. The woman who was asking for help was with her mother, who had been shot in the head. And she was also with her children, and that Good Samaritan, I was told, actually took that shooting victim to a hospital. We don't know anything more than that. We're looking to confirm that, but it appears in that one instance, a Good Samaritan stopped and actually may have transported one of the shooting victims to a hospital. I'm live in downtown Highland Park. Dana Kozlov, CBS 2 News. Joe and Erica.
So many harrowing stories, Dana, for sure. I'm wondering, how did police handle that scene? Did they have it closed off to collect evidence? And how did they handle the people wanting to come back and get their belongings?
Well, they've had it closed off to collect evidence since very shortly after the shooting. And in fact, the actual initial perimeter, which was locked down, was much larger than it is right now. That perimeter actually just shrunk about an hour ago, not even an hour ago. So it was barricaded. There were police cars that were keeping people from walking and also driving down many of the streets around this area here. And I should also mention there are police departments from all over the northern suburbs that are helping out, in addition to the Lake County Major Crimes Task Force, in addition to the FBI, all helping Highland Park Police. So it wasn't until many hours later that some people began showing up and asking if they could retrieve some of their belongings within that perimeter. And some officers would say, okay, let me help you, point them out, I'll walk you down. But some people were turned away, and just now as that perimeter shrunk, more and more people are coming back to gather what they left behind. Joe, Erica.
All right, Dana, thank you very much.
Well, the tense search for the gunman lasted for hours, of course, until we finally heard police caught the suspect in Lake Forest near Wesley and U.S. Highway 41. Here is a map there. It's not far from the scene of the shooting at 2nd and Central.
CBS 2's Charlie DeMar is live near Wesley and U.S. 41 to explain more about how investigators finally found him. And Charlie, I think there was a collective sigh of relief across the city when we all got this word tonight.
Very much so. This was an extensive and intense search that spanned several northern suburbs today. This lasted more than 8 hours. This was, again, a very extensive search for much of the day. We saw police officers walking around with their long guns drawn, searching buildings, restaurants, businesses. They were lifting up garbage cans, even going through the porta potties that were lining the route for the parade, looking for the shooter. And then again, almost 8 hours after this all unfolded, that suspected shooter was brought into custody, arrested here in Lake Forest, just a few miles away from the parade route. Tonight, new video of police arresting the man they believe opened fire during the 4th of July parade.
There's the Honda.
Frank Piketty recorded the video.
Oh my God, I can't believe this is happening. He's here. They caught him. I seen the Honda and I knew that that was the shooter. And that's when I pulled my camera out of my pocket and started videotaping what was going on.
Around 6:30, police in North Chicago also spotted the silver Honda Fit. When officers tried pulling the driver over, he drove off. The chase ended peacefully on Highway 41 near Wesley in Lake Forest, just a few miles from the parade route.
I seen the actual kid get out of the car and onto the ground. I seen a lot of assault rifles. It's big relief, yeah, knowing this is over.
So yeah, definitely a big sigh of relief for so many neighbors who live in nearby suburbs here. But just to be clear, just because an arrest was made, the investigation is far from over. We were told that that suspected shooter was then brought to the police station and questioned because they're trying to determine what his connection is to all of this. And to be clear again, no charges have been filed, at least not yet. Joe and Erica?
Yeah, Charlie, so you're talking about the suspected shooter. We know that law enforcement said early, or when they were talking about the capture, that digital evidence played a huge role, but also close to where you were, that vehicle. We know Chopper 2 was over that scene for quite some time as they surrounded it. Can you take us through sort of the strategy in terms of collecting evidence on the scene there, including the vehicle that was on that wanted poster that we had been telling our viewers to look out for hours?
That really was pivotal to this. When the police department, they put out, the Highland Park Police Department put out that all points bulletin of who they were looking for. They had zeroed in on their suspect. They had a license plate, the make and model of the car, and that put not just law enforcement on notice, but people who were driving around. You heard from the gentleman we interviewed in our story that he spotted the silver car. He knew that that had to be connected somehow. The man I spoke with, he is a tow truck driver for a living, so he was very quickly able to identify the car that was described in that bulletin. So that really was part of law enforcement strategy in trying to track this suspected shooter down, giving him really no place to go once they were confident in who they were looking for, Erica.
All right, Charlie DeMar, thank you. And as we've seen time and again through so many videos, the sheer panic that set in as people ran for cover, many of them leaving their belongings and running for their lives.
Stephen Graves spoke to people who were there, and he joins us now. And Stephen, we were talking with Dana just a minute ago about some of the stories that we're hearing from people who are coming back to gather their belongings. And I know you've heard a number of these very powerful stories.
That's right, Joe. And if we go a little earlier than that, we're talking people running in terror, not really having anywhere to go. So I talked to some people who had neighbors around here open their doors for them. And if we look down here, you can just see how just intense this was, because people left coffee cups right here behind me. You can see lawn chairs. This is on Central Avenue, where people were not in the middle of what happened, but they're just running as well, right? You hear those gunshots, so you just continue to run. And then behind me here is this line of lawn chairs. Beyond that, you can see a stuffed animal, a Sonic the Hedgehog animal there. And that gives you just a reminder that there were children here, many of them. A guy who just walked up to pick things up said this was the worst day of his life. His daughter was on the opposite side of the parade. So imagine being a parent on this side, hearing what's going on, not knowing how to get to your daughter. I talked to some parents who also said that they had their children dropped off by strangers who were maybe in their preteens, who knew where they lived. They were flagging down for help. They got dropped off at their homes. And again, people coming tonight to pick up their things are just processing this, venting. I want you to hear from one dad who had a 2-year-old daughter and a 4-year-old daughter. Listen to what he had to tell me when he tried to get his stuff this evening.
So this started off as a child's parade and a pet parade. So when we came down, you know, it was so like
fun,
wholesome, right?
Yeah.
Like kids waving at each other, there were dogs. It was, you know, the most wholesome scene you can imagine. Grandparents, and then minutes, like I've got a photograph of me crossing where it happened, the exact spot, literally about 4 minutes before this happened. Like, so we were so close to it. It's just horrifying to think, you know.
So with him, he was one of the people who did run to a house. They let him in, the people at that house. They gave him water, a cell phone, because he did not have his here. He had to try to connect with his wife, who had his other daughter, and they finally got in touch with each other after 3 hours. Take a look here again. You can see the sunscreen here, the water bottles, a book. This was a time of relaxation, a time of fun turned into terror here. Another teenager I talked to said that he had to be let in. He ran through the woods. These are people from all over the North Shore who came here for a good time. Turned into horror, but within that, within the horror, we do have some thankfulness, some strangers here who are helping out each other in this very terrible time. Joe, Erica.
Yeah, it's incredible to hear how people respond to this in so many ways, Stephen. And it sounds to me like beyond the sheer terror of what was happening and the fear of not being able to connect with your family members, at least in some cases for hours, it was also the uncertainty of exactly what was going on. You must have heard that from so many people.
Exactly, and that man you just heard from, that father, he initially went to a nearby Starbucks. He describes dozens of people in there, and within that, they had to try to find a way to get out of that situation. But if you're being told that a shooter is out there, you don't know if you could encounter him or her at some point. So what they did was they made sure that they were in a safe space, and these homes had a lot of people in them, right? These strangers just opening up these doors and them not knowing what is happening. They had to find out through Twitter, a lot of them, that the place they were at just moments before, 6 people were killed, multiple injured in a 4th of July parade. So just, it's really tough, traumatizing, as you can imagine.
All right, Stephen Graves, thank you for that perspective.
Yeah, there were hundreds of families who went to this parade this morning. Some of them returned home without loved ones. Others were seriously injured, but they all witnessed the violence.
CBS 2's Maria Phaedra joins us live with what we've learned about some of the other victims. Marie.
Erica and Joe, I want to begin with the families and the faith community now grieving the loss of a leader and a friend. In an email tonight, North Shore Congregation Israel shared that Jackie Sondheim, a lifelong member of that community, was murdered at the parade. They say that she was on staff at the synagogue for decades, including time spent teaching at its Heights preschool. They asked their congregants for prayers for her soul and her surviving family. Support for those who survived the shooting has also been pouring in on GoFundMe pages, and that is how we learned of the Kolpak and the Joyce families. The Chicago Teachers Union shared that Zoe Kolpak is a teacher. She's at Dever Elementary. They say that she, her husband, her father, and her brother-in-law were shot today. That is according to the GoFundMe page, and you see her photo with her husband there. There are 2 kids also in this photo. We've blurred their faces. They were there, but they were not hurt. All 4 of the adults are now in the hospital undergoing various surgeries. Again, it's the couple, a brother-in-law and a father. Loved ones are now asking for financial help on what will be their long road ahead. For these families, the decision to go to today's parade and the pain because of it will follow them for the rest of their lives. And as the hours go on, we do expect to learn much more about those who survived this attack and those we lost. In the newsroom, Marie Saavedra, CBS 2 News. Joe, Erica.
Well, this is always the hardest part when you start to see the pictures and the faces of these victims. And Marie, we were just talking a minute ago, this could have been much, much worse. I mean, there were 25 people with gunshot wounds and 19 of them were treated and released.
It is pretty incredible, and you hate to say that because you know for so many families it is the worst case scenario. But you think about the number of people on that parade route, the gunfire that we've heard in so many videos, and there's no question that everyone who is able to go home tonight and put their own head on their own pillow with their loved ones is grateful that it was not any worse.
Yeah, well.
And we're talking about ages from 8 to 85 years old, Marie. One of them, a grandfather, thank you, Marie, Nicholas Toledo. He was a grandfather visiting from Mexico, killed in the Highland Park parade. CBS 2's Tim McNicholas spoke with his family, and he continues our team coverage. Tim, I know so many of these children and grandchildren have such close relationships with this man and wanted to, even in just the hours after it happened, share about his life.
That's right, Erica and Joe. And now the family of Nicholas Toledo has launched an online fundraiser to help pay for funeral expenses. And I want to read to you what his granddaughter wrote in the description for that GoFundMe. It is a heartbreaking message. She wrote, "My grandfather, Nicholas Toledo, father of 8 and grandfather to many, left us this morning, July 4th. What was supposed to be a fun family day turned into a horrific nightmare for us all. Not only was Nicholas a loving man, but creative, adventurous, and funny. As a family, we are broken and numb. Our condolences go out to all the other families who lost a loved one today, but today Nicholas is our guardian angel. We ask you to please keep our family and all the families of this horrible tragedy in your prayers and stay strong as a community." We also spoke earlier with one of his other granddaughters, Kimberly Rangel.
I think we're all feeling pretty numb. We're all pretty broken inside. I think you hear about these things on the news all the time, but you don't expect it to happen like so close to home, and especially to your family. So it's all kind of affected us really hard. It's a lot.
And Rangel says the family will likely have a small service here, but Toledo wanted to be buried in Mexico. So the money raised through that GoFundMe will help them pay for expenses to ship his body. And he'd actually been visiting family here over the past few weeks. Joe and Erica.
Tim, we know this is the first time the parade has happened in over 2 years, obviously because of the pandemic, and so many people, like members of this family, part of their family, visiting from out of town and wanting to see this. Did they talk to you about what they were hoping this day would be for them and what so many other families were hoping this would be before it turned into tragedy?
Yeah, this is something that Toledo had been looking forward to as a fun day with his family. He'd be with several family members enjoying the beautiful weather and enjoying the parade. He'd been visiting the United States over the past few weeks, and this was something that he was looking forward to on his trip. And Kimberly told me that she wanted to attend the parade. She wanted to actually bring her young daughter with her, but she lives in Mundelein. She realized there was a marathon in her neighborhood today, so logistically she wasn't really able to get out of her own neighborhood easily, so she wound up saying, you know what, I can't make it. Now she's grateful that that happened, because it could have been even worse if she was there with her young daughter. Even just witnessing that, as some of the family members did, is very traumatizing.
I can only imagine the pain. Tim, thank you very much for the report and all your reporting today, along with all of our reporters. The coverage today has just been amazing. It really has.
Well, one of the interviews that really stuck out in terms of trying to get more information about the suspect was one that Sal Rezai did. We're hearing from the uncle of the suspect, who told us he was stunned when he heard the news.
Yeah, he spoke just a short time ago with Asal, and she's live now in Highwood, which is near Highland Park, just outside the suspect's home. Asal?
Yeah, Joe, Erica, it's important to note that this entire street, especially in front of this house you see here behind me, was completely blocked off by law enforcement, local Highwood police and FBI agents throughout the day. It wasn't until about 8 o'clock when the street started to clear out and we saw a car pull into this driveway you see here behind me with 2 men inside. Police let them through, let them park in the driveway and go inside the house for about 15 minutes. When they came out, police kind of interviewed them for a couple of minutes or so, and then the last unmarked car left this street, and that's when I decided to approach that car. Turns out one of the men that was getting inside, the driver, is the uncle of the suspect that is now in custody. Take a listen to what he told me before he drove away.
I'm heartbroken. I'm very heartbroken, and I can't even believe it right now. And I'm praying for all the families and for everybody that got injured and hurt.
What information did you have leading up to this morning at the parade? Did you know that he had a weapon and that he was going to?
I have no idea. I have no clue at all.
Ever any indication?
There's no indication at all. No, there's no indication that I've seen at all that would lead up to this at all. Yeah.
So was he here last night and this morning?
No. The last time I saw him was 5 o'clock yesterday, and that's what the last time I saw him. I said hi and bye to him, and that was it. We didn't talk or nothing.
What, did he sleep here last night?
Well, in the back apartment.
In the back apartment.
He lives in a back apartment here. I understand. Your message to the victims, to the families. To
everyone. I am so sorry. I'm from the bottom of my heart, and I'm very heartbroken.
You heard the uncle there say there was no indication that his nephew would do anything like this. He was in complete shock, really, when we began to talk to him, and told us that he heard of his nephew's arrest through television reports. So hearing information as we were learning it, and important to note, this is a very small suburb just north of Highland Park. This is a very tucked away, very quiet neighborhood that we are in. The suspect's uncle did say that his nephew has been living here for the past 5 years in an apartment behind the house here, living very peacefully. Neighbors we've talked to here have said that they didn't see much of the suspect or any of his family members in the past few years. As we did try to collect more information from neighbors, really neighbors just kind of stunned about all the police presence and law enforcement here on this street today. But the most important information we got today was from that uncle of the suspect that we just heard from. Joe, Erica.
Yes. Sal, that really gave us some perspective on what he says he did not know about his nephew, even though he was living right behind him. I know earlier, before nightfall came, before the capture, you saw a lot of activity there at the house. At that point, they had pushed you back pretty far. Everything from armored trucks coming in, FBI, police. If you could take us through how that all evolved. Before the uncle actually got there, the police were at the door, but it seemed that they were waiting. They were hesitating to go in.
Yeah, Erica, that's right. We got here about 5 o'clock, and it looked like I had gotten here just after the FBI did, because there was really no streets blocked off until us and a couple of other news crews began to come in. But this entire front yard was completely covered in law enforcement, FBI agents to be specific, and just a couple of local law enforcement police officers. Now, they were here for a few hours, but as soon as we got word that suspect was in custody, a lot of those FBI agents kind of left this area, clearing out this street pretty quickly. And what was left behind was a couple of local law enforcement agents, along with just a few FBI agents that left around 8 o'clock this evening. So much of the day, this street really covered in law enforcement. And as I mentioned, when that suspect was caught is when we started to see things clearing out here.
Sal, did the uncle have any indication, I'm sorry if I missed it, that his nephew had a gun, had this rifle, and that there might have been any warning signs at all about his behavior?
No, he didn't. And, I asked him very frankly, very point blank, did you know that he had a weapon? Would there were any indication, any behavior? Had he seen any of the videos that his nephew had posted online? And he said he had no idea. He said he saw him yesterday at 5 o'clock. They had a very brief hi and bye exchange. Didn't even really know the whereabouts of his nephew this morning. Had no idea he was even heading to the parade. You heard him tell us that he had no idea his nephew even had a gun. So he did seem pretty shocked with even the questions we were asking him, and he said he was in complete shock to know of the details of today's events and to know that his nephew had been arrested, Joe.
Sal, thank you very much.
Now we want to turn to our legal analyst, Irv Miller. Irv, you've been with us throughout the day prior to the capture, helping us break down what law enforcement would be doing. But what I want to ask you to take us through is next steps. So we have been waiting. I know we have several other reporters still out there on the scene looking to see if the suspect actually made it back to Highland Park Police, because at some point that's what we were hearing was going to happen. But once he's in police custody, what will be happening next from the law enforcement side, those questioning him, and potentially the Lake County prosecutor?
Well, the first thing they're going to do when they take him to a station, and I'm not so sure it's going to be the Highland Park station. They could take him to Waukegan. They could take him to the Lake County Sheriff's Department to avoid, what's going on around the Highland Park Police Department right now. But the first thing they're going to do is get an evidence technician, and that evidence technician is going to take his clothing and put it in a bag and send it to the crime lab, and also swab his hand with basically a Q-tip. And the purpose of that is to determine if there's any gunshot residue on either his hands or his clothing that could will show whether or not he recently fired a gun. And after they do that, they're going to put him in an interview room. They're going to turn on the video camera, and they're going to start recording everything he says, the questions that are asked of him, the answers that he gives. And they're going to start asking him about whether he did it, and they're going to ask him about his social background, and they're going to try to ask questions that could defeat any possible defense later on in the case. They're just trying to, cross their T's and dot their I's, is to give a judge or a jury in the future a nice, solid case to present and attempt to get a conviction. And that's the bottom line that the state's attorney's office has to deal with probably all night tonight.
Irv, would you be surprised if they hadn't interviewed him yet? I'm curious, all of the things you just laid out. Is it beneficial to let a suspect sit in a waiting room and just sort of wait and think for a minute and give officers a chance to put together their line of questioning, or go in there right away and ask him?
Joe, that's a very good question. And if you ask 50 law enforcement officers, 25 may say it's good to wait, and 25 may say that it's best to do it right away and get the ball rolling. It depends on the individual investigator, the questioning detective, what he prefers to do. And basically, if they have a suspect in there that is hostile, they may want to wait a little while, let him calm down. But if they have somebody that is starting to talk, even in the police car, as the car is being driven to the station, and he's starting to make statements, you want him to keep talking. And therefore, you're not going to wait. You're going to just keep going until you finally get what you think is his final statement, which the prosecutor hopes is an incriminating statement.
Irv, we're talking about the Lake County prosecutor. These would be local charges, and I know you've spoken to us unfortunately in circumstances like this where it's definitely a murder charge. Obviously, we have 6 people who have died. But what is the possibility that federal charges could come into play here, be it domestic terrorism or a charge that could bring more than a life sentence, under Illinois law versus federal? Could there be the potential for the death penalty?
Well, if he is charged with federal domestic terrorism, that does carry a potential sentence of the death penalty, despite the fact that Illinois law does not carry a death penalty. The maximum sentence he could get for this, if he's convicted of these charges in Illinois, is natural life imprisonment with no hope of parole. The problem with it is the state case, a murder case, which happens 99.999% of the time, is what typically happens. You can't just get a federal murder charge just because there's a murder. There has to be some type of federal jurisdiction. And that typically means behind the reasoning for the shooting is political, it could be racial, it could be social, but it has to have one of those triggering aspects to it for a federal domestic terrorism case to stand in federal court. The last thing you want to do is to charge them with a federal domestic charge, and then it can't be proven before a federal jury, and there's a finding of not guilty because you haven't met federal jurisdiction.
Okay.
All right, Irv, thank you for your help tonight and throughout the day. We appreciate it. Let's go live now to Jackie Kostak. She's out at the Highland Park Police Station where crowds have gathered there waiting for any news about the accused gunman. Jackie?
Well, Joe and Erica, about 3 hours ago, well, 2 hours ago, there was a pretty significant crowd here. That crowd has definitely dwindled at this point. There are still 5 or 6 folks who are standing around outside of sort of where all of the reporters are set up, still watching. But at one point this afternoon,